Hi, this is Carol Baskin, and welcome back to the Cat Chat Show. Today we have Jenny Schlueter from the Treehouse Humane Society in Chicago, Illinois. And tell us about what you do there.
Well, Treehouse is unique in that we were one of the first cageless no-kill shelters in the country, and we specialize in rescuing and rehabilitating sick, injured, abused, neglected stray cats. And so really what we've been trying to do is focus on the cats who might slip through the cracks. Everyone knows that about 70% of cats nationwide still are killed in shelters every year. And so what we're trying to do is, obviously the first ones that normally go are ones that are sick or injured, maybe have a behavior issue, and so those are the ones that we kind of specialize in, and then hopefully the other ones are more highly adoptable and can be transferred to other agencies or adopted from animal control.
How long have you been doing this?
Well, me personally?
You.
I have been with Treehouse about 10 and a half years. Can't believe it. It's flown by. Treehouse has been around since 1971, and so for me, animals have always been a passion of mine since I was a little kid, and I built a little animal clubhouse and the vacant lot in my subdivision and put posters all over it and kind of led discussions with the other kids, and then did a lot of volunteer work. And so right after college, I had an opportunity to move to Madrid, Spain, and it was really interesting after being involved with sheltering to be in a large city and metropolitan area with almost really no animal shelter at all. And so there was a lot of TNR going on, a lot of animals who kind of are loose pets, not necessarily defined as we might see in the United States as pets indoors with the family. And so a lot of really interesting work with spay, neuter, and TNR, and I really got involved there. And when I moved back to the States almost 11 years ago, and looked to volunteer at Treehouse, I thought, what an amazing place, because here are, because you would see so many sick and injured strays in my work in Spain, and really no one could do very much for them, so we did what we could. This place was taking in every, blind, deaf, three-legged cat that there was. But what I noticed too, there was a lot of really amazing socialization work going on, but there wasn't such an effort, a big kind of organized effort for TNR. So there were people doing it kind of on the side and kind of like, it kind of secretly almost, right? It wasn't organized, and people were kind of afraid to be open about what they were doing. And so one of my biggest goals when I started doing this work in Chicago was to get a community cats program going, a formal TNR program that worked in conjunction with a shelter, and Treehouse was the perfect fit. And so what we're able to do now, we have a really large community cats program. We sponsor over 500 feral cat colonies in the city, almost 3,000 cats, and we provide ongoing assistance. So not only do we assist people with the actual TNR process, but after that you're registered with us, and we are there to give you ongoing support. That has greatly reduced the pressure on our intake, and we are able to take in a lot more of the cats who we can rehabilitate more quickly and get adopted, as opposed to the ferals who, it was nice, maybe a lot of people appreciated that we were a place they could go in the past, but they might stay there the rest of their lives. It was hard to get them adopted out, and then it's kind of what their quality of life was. It was kind of questionable as well, being in a busy shelter environment. So I think that's something that really kind of distinguishes what we've been doing and how we work on all levels. So it's not just, well, we'll take the friendlies or we just do TNR. We kind of are always assessing, and then of course there are a million gray area cats that you're not quite sure where they belong right away, but that's okay. We spend enough time to figure out what to do with them, and then they might go down this path, they might go down that path, but whatever they need, we're going to get it for them and get them to going to the next place so that we can take in the next one waiting on the list.
Wow. You said that this started in 1971. That's a long time ago. That was like before people were thinking about any of these kinds of things. I mean, TNR, that would have been just unheard of, I would think of.
Well, and TNR wasn't quite in the, I don't know, I wasn't involved in the 70s. However, I know through a lot of historical documents and things that people were doing it, but there wasn't really an organized effort. But yeah, I mean, back in the 70s when we did start no kill, I mean, that was something that, what is that? Nobody knew what that was. That was really a big part of what we were kind of promoting, was that the group of kind of families and people who started Treehouse noticed that Chicago Animal Care and Control was just absolutely horrific, overrun with animals. They were still using, the gas chambers. I mean, really, really antiquated methods. Strays, lots of strays in the streets, cats and dogs. I mean, especially cats. And so they really wanted to do something about it. And they also knew that, things we're still talking about today. People didn't want to go to adopt a pet in a shelter because it was depressing for them. They didn't want to go in there and feel horrible. They noticed that the animals that were in the shelter, in some of the big traditional shelters, weren't getting any care. Not the care they needed. There just wasn't funding or resources to give them the care they actually needed. And so those were problems in sheltering that they identified back in the 70s that they wanted to address with this organization. And so we continue to build on that. But I think that any organization, what you need to do is identify the needs in your community and target your programming around it. I think a lot of times, we have ideas about this would be really great, but are you doing it because it sounds interesting or attractive, or is it because that's really what your community needs, or what else are other people doing in your community? So maybe another group has this covered, but they're not doing so much of something else that you could do. So I think that's something that all of us in animal welfare need to remember when we're kind of trying to, because the resources are not, they're limited, and so when we have to figure out where we're going to allocate all our resource, time, money, then we should be thinking in those terms, and that's what Treehouse has been doing.
I think it really makes a difference for an organization, whether it's a for-profit business or an animal rescue group, to focus in very narrowly on what they can do best, and then do it better than anybody else in the world. So it sounds like you guys very early on found that niche and have pursued it.
Yeah, well, it was a niche. There was a really dire need, especially for sick and injured stray cats, and there, as we all know, a lot of felines can often be misunderstood, and so that has been the goal. There were a lot more dog rescue groups, and I think that this is really changing in the last couple of years in the United States, but we all know now there are more pet cats than dogs, but they still, to me, are the underdog in the animal welfare world as far as being a little bit more misunderstood. Their needs aren't addressed maybe quite as easily as dogs, and in terms of their behavior and training needs, and we're just beginning to uncover better ways to train cats, clicker training cats. People thought that couldn't be done, and we know it can, right? So absolutely, you want to kind of identify what the need is, and we've been trying to address it. And in Chicago, personally, we are seeing a lot of improvement with cats, which is amazing, because nationwide.
When you say improvement, you mean like in the numbers?
Yeah, the euthanasia numbers are decreasing, the intake numbers are decreasing. It's still not where we need it to be, but at least we are seeing that progress. And for both dogs and cats, we still have a ways to go, but even over the last decade, the euthanasia rates at Chicago Animal Care and Control have been cut in half.
Wow.
So we're excited about that.
And I'm sorry, cut in half over how long of a period of time?
Over the last decade.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really, that's another really important thing, is you have to measure success to know whether or not you succeeded.
Absolutely. You got to keep measuring. So I'm always checking in with them on their intake. Okay, what's the intake this quarter? What's the euthanasia this quarter? So that we kind of know. And then where are they coming from? Another thing that I think people, how do you balance every shelter and organization gets calls, right? I need help with this, and they're from all over the place, and so you start thinking, you don't want to turn anyone down, but again, do you target some areas and you really work hard in those areas because those are the areas that need the most help? Well, how do you know? Well, you start tracking where you're getting the calls, what zip codes are they coming from. In our case, at Animal Control, where are they getting the most cats? Where are they getting nuisance calls about cats? Where are they getting the most relinquishment of cats? From which zip codes? And from there, we target those areas. So, and that changes too. And it's really interesting when you kind of start looking at those numbers. And from year to year, you say, well, wow, I see a real increase in this area this year. I wonder why. Is it awareness? Sometimes it even backfires because you're doing a lot of outreach in a neighborhood, and then suddenly people weren't maybe doing anything. They weren't calling to complain about the cats, and now they're seeing them and they are calling more. So that's okay. So then you adjust again what you're doing. But yeah, measuring and measuring and measuring is so important.
Wow. How did they come up with the name Treehouse?
That's a great question. It's really interesting because some people really react to the name, and I think that
it sounds fun.
It sounds fun. The woman who named the organization is still around and involved with us as a volunteer, and I asked her, and she told me basically when they found the property, which was to become our shelter, really super large oak tree in the front, and it was remarkable. The tree was a beautiful tree, and she said, one of the things we loved most about the property was this giant, enormous tree in the front. And to me, we wanted to incorporate that somehow. We were so happy about it. And, cats like elevation, and tree is a symbol of strength and security. And we just felt like we wanted to incorporate that in the name because it means so many wonderful things to people. So, yeah, exactly. Like a place where they can escape at when they get out of trouble or when they're in trouble, right? And, the strength of the tree and the beauty of the tree and the resilience of trees, and that they can live for so long, and they can provide so much. They provide shade, they help clean the air. Later we can use the trunk for wood. So they really wanted to incorporate that concept, which I thought was really beautiful.
Wow.
On the other hand, recently I was explaining that actually to a graphic designer. We work on a project, and she asked me about the logo, and I explained this to her, and she said, oh, because I thought it was kind of ironic, because I felt like, well, isn't it bad if cats get scared and they run up a tree and then they get stuck in the tree? I said, that's not what we were going for. But so anyway, I think I like to use the interpretation of the strength and security of the tree as I forget the word that I want to use, a refuge, right? A refuge for them to be until they go on to their next home.
How is your population divided? I'm sure it's always changing, but what percentage are permanent residents, if any? What percentage are like in the door and out really fast, like kittens? How does your population break down?
That's a great question too, and that's something we've been working on a lot over this last, especially over the last 5 or 6 years. So, before we had the Community Cats program, we also did take in sick and injured feral cats, and a lot of times because of injuries or illness that they might have, and because TNR wasn't as accepted yet, we were keeping feral cats in and socializing them. And when I became involved about 10 years ago, I noticed that, wow, it's amazing that they help these feral cats. On the other hand, it's not sustainable to keep all these feral cats in here. So there was the whole 3rd floor of our headquarters was a feral cat room, like a socialization room. And what I noticed, and what anyone who knows anything about feral cats would know, is volunteers will go into the room. Anyone who would step in the door, open the door, and it was like a giant herd. They would all move as one unit, to the opposite side of the room. And so then you would walk over to kind of approach it, and then maybe some other ones would start running back to the other side. So we learned a lot. So I did a lot of work studying some top veterinary behaviorists and our observations with our own socialization program. And what we decided to do was divide up a lot of the larger rooms in the house into smaller spaces so that the colony sizes would be smaller. So they would have less space, but they also would have less roommates. And when people ask me about that, oh, don't you feel bad they have a smaller space? I said, would you rather live in a 2,000 square foot house with 20 roommates, or 5, whatever, or a 500 square foot house with 2 roommates? You know what I mean? Like, I think that we can do so much with vertical space and all kinds of other enrichment tools and things for them that you don't need the square footage necessarily. Now, of course, you do. We also provide minimum of 20 square foot of space per cat. We're down to that. Back then, it was like 12 12 square feet. There wasn't enough space. So we worked really hard on adjusting what we did. So before, the rooms were segregated with, feral cats were in here, and then we had a category called Step Up that was kind of like you made a lot of progress. You weren't quite ready to be in the regular socialized cat rooms, but you were kind of in between. So they had an area, and then then the other areas would be for the friendlier cats. But then some overstimulation cats and alpha males would be here, and they take turns being out of enclosures, and it was crazy. We reorganized everything so that every colony has a good mix of personalities. And we started that process about 8 years ago. I mean, we did all this work, and then we did the proposal. We started moving everybody around, and I would say at that time, I would say 80% of our population then was considered semi-feral or feral, or shy or very shy, however you want to put it, right? And now we're down to less than 5% as shy or very shy. So it took us about 8 years. And this was just intensive socialization, integration of mixed personalities, smaller rooms, and then a very gradual reduction of the total population through adoption, through attrition. I mean, a lot of them were very old because they had been there for a long time. But a lot of the cats who were progressing when they were segregated, but kind of hit a wall, moving them so that they could live with more socialized cats was really what kind of it took to push them over the edge, to kind of give them that boost that they needed to kind of succeed. And it was really amazing.
You're the first person I've heard about doing that.
Oh,
and
really?
It makes such perfect sense, because if you are very shy and you see that the other cat in your group is like, oh wow, it's people, then it's like, well, maybe it's not so bad.
Absolutely, they learn, and that's what I did research, and I read that there were these behaviorists in the UK, and they talked really extensively. They did this study on how cats learn from each other by observing each other interacting with people. So same thing, and see, a lot of times the idea that some people had that were doing intense socialization was, you had to do all this extra screening and training as a volunteer to even be able to enter that room, because it was like, be quiet and tiptoe around, and and yes,
the cats are all like, these people are sneaky.
I know. Well, and of course I don't want to put it down. Some socialization training is necessary and important for their safety and to not disturb the cats, of course. However, I also said, if we're preparing them for real life, they're not going to go to home, and we can tell people, take them home, but now tiptoe around, don't move suddenly in your own home, you know what I mean? Some are going to have kids and other pets, and you know what I mean? This is the real world we're preparing them for. So let's get them out. Let's get them in the rooms that are busy. They were kind of off on the 3rd floor away from traffic. I said, they need to be where the traffic is. Now, is it going to be, it's kind of a tough love approach, because at first it was quite stressful on some of them, and we were very careful in how to acclimate them. And we, always, when we acclimate a new cat into a colony, there's a lot of observation. How are they doing? Is there an issue with somebody in there? If there is, let's try them somewhere else. So it's never just, hey, where's the space available today? Okay, you go there and make it work. It's, if this room isn't working out, we're going to move you. Or, you're an alpha and there's already an alpha male in there, then we're not going to put you in there. And I know some people don't like that term alpha either. And it's not, not such a fast and hard term, but you know what I mean.
There's always a top cat.
Yeah, the most assertive. And if we have two guys that are really super assertive, or girls, then maybe you don't want to use that room, right? So anyway, yeah, it's really interesting, and I wasn't sure either how it was going to work, but I said, here's what I read, here's the proposal, let's try it and see, because this is not sustainable what we're doing now. And it's really been amazing, because at the same time we really developed and continue to enhance our community cats TNR program, and now these cats are living the good life. I mean, we have caretakers building mini cat mansions in their backyards and modifying their garages and their back porches and heating pads, and so because people say, how do they survive the Chicago winters? And I said, you know what? First of all, they're resilient. They really know, they're super resourceful, and if you can just give them a little assistance, so you make sure that they have regular feeding times and fresh water, and just that they stay dry and they stay out of the wind, those basic things are really all they need. It's what happens when cats, when you're seeing cats frostbitten things in the winter, is those were not feral cats who really knew how to adapt to elements. So maybe those are cats who were dumped out of their home, or recently recently in February we took in a guy who, it looks like he was hit by a car, just grazed, seemed like he must have been knocked out, laid in a puddle, and it was one of those thaw-freeze cycles that had thawed out and then started freezing up on him. And poor guy, he didn't stand a chance. But if you provide just and we have him, he's okay. We're still treating him, and he did lose some limbs, some toes, because they were frostbitten up. But he's stabilized, he's going to be okay. But those are the basic things that they need, and those are pretty easy to supply to feral cats. And you get them spayed, neutered, vaccinated, you make sure they're eating well, you make sure they have the shelter they need, and they can do well. And these cats are no longer coming into our building, and therefore we're able to take so many more of the friendly stays that were dumped that can get adopted more quickly. And so we're helping more cats by just adapting to their needs and being a little bit more realistic about what can be provided and what really is in their best interest. Not in their best interest, not in what we think is their best interest, in their best interest.
Up until very recently, the state of Florida made it illegal to, you could trap a cat, you could fix it, but you could not release it back out.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, did you guys have to go through a process in Illinois getting laws changed so that you could do these things?
It's such an interesting question. So I heard about it in Florida. I couldn't believe it. I said, because I always tell people in Florida, I'm so jealous because we have so many more challenges with the weather. Yeah, sometimes I guess the heat can be an issue too, but not in the same way, I don't think. They can get relief from the heat quite easily. So when I started the Community Cats program, there was no ordinance in place. We have a really great ordinance in Cook County, and there is also a state law that really kind of opens the door to doing it. And Illinois has really great laws, but then the enforcement is another issue. But as far as animal protection and cruelty laws, it's one of the best in the country. So that's kind of to our advantage. But I'll tell you, when I started doing TNR workshops, and this was back in 2004. I had some people even within the TNR community, and again, these are people who are kind of doing it on their own, but kind of underground, and they reprimanded me and said, how dare you be so open about this, because you're making these people targets, because now they're going to get fined. And I said, I don't think that's true, because you could argue the animal. I think what you're referring to is like the animal abandonment argument, that you take them and you fix them, and then so now that cat's yours, and how can you put it back? You're abandoning the cat. So what was important we took all that into consideration, and we did work with someone to develop an ordinance, and the key part of the ordinance states that a feral cat caretaker is not an owner, and that a feral cat is not an owned cat. And I know in animal welfare, we don't always like to talk in terms of owner and guard, but anyway, the preferred term is guardian. In this case, we use the term caretakers. So you manage the colony, you are required to provide food and shelter and monitoring, and required to provide a report to your sponsor agency. In our case, we sponsor, like I said, over 500 colonies. But again, any kind of legal issues that would, like let's say, because a lot of people will say, well, I'm afraid to do this because what if this feral cat bites someone and then I get sued? So the ordinance protects everyone, and so that the person feeding the cat is not the owner. And now there, of course, are issues that are not so good. There are ramifications by the person not being the owner that can be an issue too, when it comes to someone tampering with the colony and harming the cats in the colony. Now you're not an owner, so you can't do as much about that. So
oh wow,
you know what I mean?
Never thought about that.
Yeah, so we've come across a lot of challenges, and there are things that maybe we could tweak, but right now we're leaving it as it is, because for the most part it's providing care for the cats and providing a clear mandate for what they need and what the sponsors need, and a clear mandate for how we report to the county, and a clear mandate in terms of public health, what they want to see, which is every cat is vaccinated against rabies. And so we have a system in place to report that. And so it's working quite well. But yeah, I mean, when we had the argument, going back to your original premise with the abandonment, I consulted with a lawyer friend, and what he told me was, the law is not clear, and just like anything else, the law needs to be tested. So let's say someone did that, they did TNR, and there isn't a law mandating TNR in your town. What I would say is, do it anyway, because if someone took you to court, you could argue to the judge, there's precedents all over the country for organizations doing this, and laws supporting this. So I'm not the owner, this is a feral cat. It's just like if you took in a squirrel with a broken leg and then helped the squirrel with the broken leg, you're not abandoning the squirrel when you re-release the squirrel. You know
true.
what I mean? So I think most judges would probably rule in favor of the person once they understood the concept. But you never know, and this is why you have to develop these laws and test them.
Hang on just a second.
Yeah.
When people call me, it causes this thing.
Oh. Mhm. I know how that goes. Very good questions, though, because the legal stuff is tricky.
I don't know, you probably know better than I do, how prevalent that is around the country.
The TNR ordinances?
Well, oh good, it's still running.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't know if there are, I don't know percentage-wise across the country how many people can do TNR without worrying about violating some law.
Yeah, there are more and more laws, but the way I look at the TNR laws is it helps to kind of organize the program and makes very clear, who's accountable to who. But I don't think it's an issue if there isn't a law in your community that you should have any problem doing it. Again, because there's so many laws out there now that establish that feral cats are not pets. So if they were pets, it would be a different thing. This cat lived in your house for a long time, you adopted them, you signed a contract saying this is my pet, and then put them out, that would be very different. But as far as a cat who was born outside, that doesn't have an owner or guardian, is not registered to anyone, then I think that, again, you almost have to test it in your town and talk about ordinances. But Alley Cat Allies, for example, is really big on doing TNR and not establishing an ordinance, because sometimes you get into that territory of getting an ordinance together, and they make it so the reporting requirements and all of the rules, they're not realistic because they're made maybe by lawmakers who are afraid of the nuisance components, or afraid of public health issues, or if don't want to get complaints from everybody in their district about cats on their lawn. So then they make it so difficult, and there's so many constraints put on the caretaker that it's not feasible and it's not attractive, and then people say, well, I can't do this. And that's something that kind of happened in the law in Milwaukee. And I was working with some people from Wisconsin Humane Society, and they're trying to figure out now what to do, because it's almost they were looking to kind of implement an ordinance similar to ours in Cook County, and the lawmakers got a hold of it and then started to say, I can't remember the specifics, but something about the colony has to, wherever you're feeding the colony, they have to stay within a certain very small range, and they can't go in someone else's yard. Yeah, right?
They're cats.
And then you're responsible for any damage they do to somebody's property, and, then it starts to be really difficult. So what we try to do is, I think it's way more important than any kind of establishing a law, is just being really transparent about what you're doing. And I think that's the biggest change I've seen in the evolution of TNR in this country, not just in Chicago, but anyone I talk to, from having to hide and be secretive, and I only feed at 3 in the morning when nobody sees me, to and I wouldn't dare tell my neighbors what I'm doing because they don't see the cats, they only come out at night. And I say, no, you should tell them what you're doing. We always canvass an entire, so if we're working on one block, then we canvass that block, every adjacent block, with door hangers and little flyers to say, we're from Treehouse. One of your neighbors has contacted us because there are a lot of cats in the area she's been feeding. We want to get them before there are kittens, or, there are some kittens, we're going to take them in, but we're going to get everybody fixed. They're going to be vaccinated, they're going to be dewormed, they're going to be microchipped. So the public health issue is going to be resolved. We are going to be your ongoing contact for any issues with this colony. They're going to be fed daily. They're going to have housing. They're going to provide free rodent abatement for you all. Make sure you know that. And if you have questions, call us. But we need you to know that this is happening. And so a lot of times the people who contact us say, oh, please don't pass out that letter. I don't want my neighbors to know anything. But we have found that it's really important, because if someone does not like what you're doing and you try to be sneaky, they're going to probably find out. And then they're going to be really angry that you didn't tell them. And then when you try and fix things, then it's a lot harder because they're already this angry. But if you get them right away and you just very respectfully explain what you're trying to do and invite questions and comments, then we can address any issues right off the bat. And, if your neighbor has a really beautiful garden and they're decided to use one of the beds as a litter box, we can talk about that right away and we can provide solutions right away, as opposed to, well, I'm going to let this simmer for the next 6 months or a year or whatever, and then when I can't take it anymore, I'm going to call you, and then by then we start to suggest some solutions to fix the problem, and they're already tired of it. So let's address it right from the get-go, and that seems to help a lot.
Wow. And you probably save a lot of cats from being poisoned and trapped.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the other reason, because other people will just take matters into their own hands. And the other thing is we have a really strong partnership with Chicago Animal Care and Control. And of course, like most city agencies in Chicago and Illinois especially, the budget crisis is just ridiculous. They have no money or resources to have enough staff to even get close. I mean, it's like a joke in our town that if you call animal control because you just saw a lost dog or whatever and you need, they'll come in a couple days. Well, because they can't, there's such a backlog of requests. So we're practically have been begging them for years, just forward the cat request to us. You don't even have to do them. Just let us, and we're still working out some details because there's some, legal liability issues where they feel, they have to, how government bureaucracy works. They have to address every call that comes in. They have to do something. So they maybe are giving traps, but they're saying, if the cats are chipped to your colony, registered by you, then we'll call you come pick them up and put them back out. And what I'm saying is, but just don't give them the traps in the first place. But either way, I mean, that cooperation is essential. And the other thing we're doing now is they've got an automated report they're working on. So as soon as a feral is identified upon intake, we're notified. So then us and another agency have divided the city in half. So we're taking this half, they're taking that half, and then we'll go transport them to our spay-neuter clinic. If they're healthy, we will go ahead and put them back. And then we will canvass the area again and say, we just want you to know, we were, called by animal control. A cat from this block was brought in last week. The cat was not euthanized. The cat is back in its area. We are looking for somebody who might have more information. Is somebody around here feeding the cat? And then, if so, we'd like to help you. We can get you registered. We can get you housing. We can help you with food. We can help you with vet care. So that has been really tricky. And again, that's a kind of the feral freedom concept some other groups have started doing too. And we've been doing that loosely for many years. However, there were some communication issues about getting the notifications to us in time, and it's finally happening in the way it needs to. But I know a lot of people don't feel comfortable putting the cats back to an unknown situation. It's one thing when we know someone calls and says, I'm feeding these cats and I'm dedicated to helping these cats. And another thing is putting them back and maybe not knowing who that person is. However, most of the time, if the cat's truly feral and looks good, you can assume that someone was, it got food and shelter somewhere. But then what we want to do is just really nail that down and make sure that they're going to be okay. At this point, too, it was harder a few years ago because, we've been slowly registering colonies. And now that we've got 500 colonies, most of the time when they call, we know there is a feeding station, usually within a mile, hopefully hopefully less than that. But you can at least feel good about, well, if we put this guy back, we know at least there's a feeding station not too far from here. So if they didn't have something in the immediate area where they were trapped, it shouldn't be long before they should figure out where it is, and they can hang out over there.
The word gets out fast.
The word gets out, and that's based on studies too. There was the Ohio State University. There's a vet researcher there that was radio collaring cats and coyotes in Cook County Forest Preserve District and studying how they interacted. They have managed colonies in the Forest Preserve District, and they were studying how much they roamed. And one guy was like 18-mile territory, but I think the average was like 1.4 miles or something. So that's really interesting too, and there aren't a ton of studies yet on that, but as more and more studies come out like that and we can better understand the roaming patterns, the neutered versus the unneutered, how that affects it. Obviously that when they're neutered, that roaming usually is decreased significantly, especially when they have nice food and shelter. It's I know my personal backyard colony doesn't roam much more out of their house to the patio chair, to the fence, the top of the fence at the back, looking down at the compost pile, maybe to see a rat or a mouse, and then back home. That's not more than 500 feet. So
it's funny that you said to see a rat or a mouse, because that's the one thing that we hear from the Florida Wildlife Commission, and I'm assuming probably in other states from the DNR, is that, all of these feral cats are just decimating the wildlife population. It's like, if they're getting fed, they're just watching those other animals. They're not catching them.
This is a great segue. Well, actually, so that is something that as we did more and more of TNR and the words got out and we had more and more requests for help, and then we started targeting the areas that really needed help, we were running into situations, which probably isn't very surprising either, where some people have been feeding cats and they've been in the same house for 20, 30, 40 years and don't know about spay neuter or didn't know about our services. So you can imagine that we would get that. One of the biggest projects I did in one very, very small Chicago backyard had about 60 cats. And so an elderly caretaker, pretty overwhelmed, we got them all done. We took in about 30. A lot of kittens and socialized cats. Then we worked on to get admitted to the shelter. So then we're down to 30, but 30 is still a lot for a very small urban backyard. So we really wanted to reduce the population. So what we do in situations like that is had to find relocation spots. And traditionally shelters do barn cat programs, right? If they want to relocate, all right, well, let's find some barns and stables. But when you're in the middle of downtown Chicago, the nearest barn and stable is pretty far, and we exhausted a lot of our resources. I mean, most farmers have plenty of barn cats already and they don't really need any more. So what we did was, I thought, another thing that had been in the news a lot over the last couple of years is the streets and sanitation budget for rodent abatement was slashed. And we had so many people complaining about rats, but what you hear time and time again from colony caretakers is, I love my colony. I don't have any rats. My neighbors love me too because they recognize that my colony cats keep down the rats in our block, right? Well, guess who has a lot of rats, but not a lot of alley cats? Some of the, most economically well-off neighborhoods in the city, of course, are in areas with lots of restaurants and businesses and shops, and so of course their alleys are full of that refuse. And that attracts tons of rodents, and because people usually in more, economically upward mobile neighborhoods, their animals are spayed and neutered. The pet cats are spayed and neutered. They're not abandoning them, and they're not having babies outside, so they don't have any stray cats. So we said, we have the perfect solution. You have rats, you don't have any cats. Over here we have got a ton of cats, and we know they're killing the rats or keeping them away. So we started the Cats at Work program as an offshoot of our Community Cats TNR program. And this was wonderful because it solved a practical problem that we had. And it has been absolutely wonderful. It's growing like mad, especially now because, again, in springtime, the daffodils come and the tulips and the rats come out, And so We have been really, really lucky. We had a lot of great press recently, and it's been wonderful because there was a little Chicago Tonight did something, and then another radio station just did something, and then the Fox News investigative reporter came out because he's, I don't know, is this really work? And so he asked me, do you have a caretaker I can go interview, and she'll tell me how it's worked in her yard. Gave him a few names. The first one he visited, he arrived with his camera crew, and the cat had just killed a rat and deposited right there on her side. And she said, "There it is. She just brought me this one." I said I couldn't have planned it better. It was perfect. And this was a cat we rescued out of a hoarding situation. She's great. The other thing that's really wonderful about that situation, and we're seeing more and more of it, is that we have condo associations who, as a condo board, vote together on getting community cats and make it part of a community project.
Oh, wow.
So their dues, their monthly dues, part of that goes towards the care of the cats.
Nice.
And this is really amazing because something that I know we dealt with early on in the program, with people calling and saying, "Oh, I've been feeding the cats and I really love your program and I want to do this. However, I live in a condo and nobody else, I have to be sneaky because nobody else wants them around, and oh, I can't do it because I live in a condo. Oh, I can't do it. I live in a multi-unit, or I live in an apartment building." So there's an assumption that if you live in a multi-unit dwelling of whatever kind, that you aren't going to be able to participate in the program. We're trying to disprove that we are seeing cases where you can do that. And that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes you might live in a building where someone is opposed to it, and then we have to negotiate how it's going to work. But I really love it when there's a multi-unit dwelling and they together decide that they want to do this, and that it brings them together as a community. And the best thing about this project was they called me up a few weeks after they got the cats to report. So they acclimate for a few weeks, of course, before they're let out. And the first night they let them out, they said all the neighbors got together. It was a lovely warm spring night, and they all got their lawn chairs out in the backyard, and everybody brought some drinks and food, and they just hung out and watched the cats and enjoyed and had a little party. And so I love it. It's bringing communities together. I mean, neighbors maybe who probably didn't interact that much before, and suddenly they're all kind of rallying around this cause. And more importantly, they're thrilled because they said we couldn't enjoy the backyard before because we'd sit out there and rats would run across our feet, dig up holes in the grass and burrow under our stuff. And so that's been really wonderful.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. It's been really wonderful way to help. It helps people, helps the cats, helps us find placement when we're dealing with these big projects and they can't all go back. So it's great.
I heard you guys are expanding your
We
efforts
are.
and are doing a huge capital campaign. Tell us what your plans are for the future.
So exciting. So as you know, back in the 70s, we got that little house with a tree in front, and we retrofitted it to make it a shelter the best way that we could. And I've talked about, using the attic as a feral cat room, and we have expanded to use every square inch of space that we could in that little place. I mean, I'm not kidding. The X-ray machine is in some old storage room in the basement, and we've got our donations, and sometimes we have to make sure it doesn't pile up around the X-ray table, and it's ridiculous how we've squeezed so much. Educational presentations, 1,000 adoptions a year. How many visit in what was a single family home, a very nice sized single family home, but still it's not big enough to do everything we need to do. Even a surgical suite is in like what used to be the pantry. You know what I mean? So we're very excited because we've learned so much, and we're this little grassroots group, and trial by error, and just trying to figuring out on our own, and then combined with research and best practices that we're studying how to help more animals, and how do you keep helping more and more, and the demand is greater, and more people are aware of these programs, so they're coming to us, and so it feels like it's never ending, and you always need to do more, and you need more space, and we're finally in a position to be able to get it, because it's been a long time where we thought, man, we really want to do this right, but you always feel like you're doing what you can, but it's not, the facility's more adequate, and
Are you building on the same property, or are you having to get more property?
No, so we were really fortunate to have someone donate a piece of land just a few miles north of where we are now. And the neighborhood is really interesting because that's another thing when you talk about, well, how do we be strategic about things? Do you want to go somewhere where you're providing veterinary services for people who need them, right? But you also want to go somewhere where you're going to have a lot of people who are really going to be interested in adopting, so maybe families. And so where we are is one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the country. So just to the west of us, there's a large Indian Pakistani immigrant community, and there's a lot of opportunities there for educational outreach and the low-cost services. And then just to the north, we've got the kind of near North Collar suburbs where there are a lot of families with kids and even older people who are going to really be interested in adopting. And then to the east, it's really mixed with all kind, young professionals plus some immigrants and kind of up-and-coming neighborhoods. So I love that we're going to be in a place where it's just so diverse, and a pretty good corridor to the rest of the city. Although we're kind of far in the north end of the city, we're on a road that's the longest road in the city that connects the north and the south side, so that's really good. And then bus and train lines are not far off either. So starting from the ground up, the building is going to be like almost 5 times the size that we have now. We are anticipating by moving in to be able to adopt out twice as many animals and to provide finally low-cost full-service veterinary services. So we do have a low-cost spay-neuter clinic, and we do vaccines, and we do 1 wellness day a week, but already the demand for that wellness day, and it's for dogs and cats, is far surpasses what we can accommodate. So now people are having to wait for weeks to get in, and so we're going to be able to do much more to help so many more animals. And now we have to do most of our workshops and seminars off-site because there isn't a place where there isn't an animal. I mean, the animals live everywhere. They live in our offices, they live in the bathroom, they live in the kitchen, they live in the clinic, which I'm not so sure that's always a good idea. And of course we don't really mind. We're doing seminars now in one of the cat rooms, and it's okay, but then, you're in the middle of something and maybe there's a fight, or someone goes to the bathroom, or someone has an accident, and oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, let me clean that up. So we're going to have an education center. We're going to have a great space where we can do a lot of our outreach events right there. We're in an area where we're going to invite our rescue partners in to show their animals, and that's really big. We really like to partner with other people. Although we've created this niche for ourselves, our mission statement talks about the welfare of all animals and the people who love them and provide services to everybody who needs them. And so we really want to invite, small mammal rescues and, dog rescues, of course. And, lots of our partner organizations will have a space on the weekends to come and do things with us, which I think is going to be really great. And we even have a dedicated space for our colony cats, because we have colony cats at the shelter, and they are going to have an amazing new building. In fact, their house is going to be a replica of the old Treehouse, and it's going to be really nicely done. And so they'll have a dedicated space and a cat garden for them on the property. The resident clinic and isolation areas are going to be greatly enhanced, and that's been a big challenge for us in the building we're in now. Just, a single family home is not made of the materials that are going to be really the best as far as what to be able to sanitize them the way you need them to be. And although we've done as much retrofitting as if we can, we really, to be able to start and use the materials that we need is going to make the length of stay for the animals much shorter. So hopefully get them out the door much more quickly, get more in the door, so we can just keep getting them in and out as quickly as possible and finding homes for as many. And studies also show that when organizations open a new building, there is that buzz. Of course, people want to come and see your new place, and we really hope to capitalize on that. That it's going to be a really comfortable place for people to be, and it's going to be a community center to get education on all kinds of topics. We have a behavior hotline. We answer, I can't even remember. I think it's like over 5,000 requests for behavior advice a year. I mean, an unbelievable amount.
Wow.
Because people don't always know what to do, and they don't necessarily want to give their cat up. So let's keep them in their homes. Let's make it work so they don't have to do that. So we'll be able to do a lot more of that kind of work as well. And we're really working now on anti-decoy legislation, and I think that having a space to have those meetings to really formulate that. We did really well with the community cats legislation. We really want to do the same with the anti-decoy legislation. It's ridiculous that a country, of our size and stature, still lets this happen. There's so many other countries in the world where it's illegal. We need to get on top of that. And so those kinds of activities, and we'll actually have a conference room where we can get together and work on those things. Just little things like that we're so grateful for. And I think probably I left the best for last. The thing I'm most excited about is when you come in the entrance where, kind of the reception where you're going to get the information you need to figure out where you're going to go in our building. We are going to have a small cafe, which I'm so excited about. We hope someday to expand that too. Originally we had that space a lot larger in our initial plans, and then you start drawing everything else, and then that got smaller and smaller, of course, because of the focus is the cats, and so we're going to prioritize the space for them. But I'm very excited that we're going to be able to have, again, a really low pressure place for people to come in, relax, observe the cats, get a coffee. And I think that if we can get people who maybe weren't thinking of coming in to adopt. I think some people avoid visiting shelters because they think they're going to get the hard sell and pressure, and
they'll be sad.
Yeah, or they'll be sad, and they can just come and hang out and at a distance observe and not feel like they have to, because what else are you doing? You come in, they're going to assume you want to volunteer, you want to adopt. So I think this will be a really great way to kind of bring in new people.
Idea.
Yeah, we're excited about that as well.
How do you guys raise your funds?
Well, we're really, really super lucky to have amazing, dedicated supporters all across the country who recognize, it's really surprising to me, even still to this day, as I go through and I'm looking at our list of supporters, the people who have been giving monthly for 10, 20 years, who I think really identified with the niche that we've been working on with the sick and injured cats and the strays that nobody was helping, that didn't have a voice, and the cageless environment, and just all the innovative things that we try to maintain. I think a lot of people really identify with that and are really super loyal to us. And so we've got a lot of, really, we depend mostly on individual giving that way. Of course, we do grants as well, and a little bit of foundation support or corporate support as well. But really, the vast majority is individual giving.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just really, really grateful. And I think our fundraising, what I've tried to do with our fundraising program is not make it about making people feel guilty or that we're really desperate. I mean, what we try to do is we just have a program of communicating and storytelling to our supporters about, certain cats that we're helping. And we will say, just recently there was a litter of kittens in one of the most underserved areas. There was a homeless man feeding the cats, and he was really alarmed when he realized that one of them was pregnant, and we got her in, and she also had an upper respiratory infection, and so she needed some treatment. And then during treatment, of course, she had 8 kittens.
Of course, 8.
8.
Couldn't be 3.
It had to be 8. And she was one of the first moms we had of kitten season. We just wrote to everyone, she came in, she's going to be one of many. These are the needs we have for mothers and kittens, and these are the things that come up. And kitten season is very costly, and now we're partnering with the city to get all the bottle babies out because they're euthanized every day at 7:00, no matter what time they come in. The city doesn't have resources to care for the babies overnight, and they're not going to let them sit there without eating. They need to eat. So we're working on that, and that's going to be, we feel really compelled to help there. But it's another burden, a big burden that really we hadn't budgeted for. But because of some changes with the transfer program, they really needed us to take on the bulk of that work. So we just communicate with people, and we tell them our successes, and we tell them what we're trying to do, and I feel like it's an approach that works really well. So there's not a lot of, here's a penny in here, and would you We really need your help. Give me some, or I sent you this calendar. Now you better send me something back. It's just really frank sharing of information, and I think people do respond to that. So.
The organizations that I've talked to that have been the most successful have always said the same thing, that
really?
we never try to come across as desperate, because people want to be involved in something that's working.
Yeah.
And you're showing them this is how your money is making this work. So I think that's very smart.
Yeah. People get turned off by the shock value stuff and the desperate pleas. I mean, there's some charity that's been sending me, what do they say on the envelope? Oh God, it's horrible. I mean, it makes me cry. And it's a great cause, of course. I think it's for an orphanage, and there's a little boy, and he looks really sad on the envelope, and it says, "Throw me away, I'm used to it."
Oh.
Oh my God. And the first time I saw it, I thought, oh, that's horrible. I just feel and I thought, just for a second, I thought, I wonder if that would work. I said, no, I would never do, but, because it hits you hard. It made me feel absolutely horrible. But then you resent them too, and then you feel guilty about that. I want to help the little boy, but why did you have to put me in that position now? I feel like a horrible person, So yeah, I agree. I think for fundraising, people they want to know what you're doing. They want to know you're spending their money wisely. They want to know that you're being strategic about what you're doing, and that basically that your values align with theirs. And if that's not happening, there's really no use trying to convince someone of something different. Either they like what you're doing or they don't. And that's it. And then you need to not be afraid to ask for what you need, and sometimes it's surprising what people will give you, and sometimes they can't give you quite as much as you need. You always feel like you need more, but you make it work.
One of the things we're finding is that people are starting to leave us in their wills. We've been around long enough that that's starting to happen. And so some of these people only donated maybe $50 when they were alive, and then they leave you hundreds of thousands of dollars when they die.
Amazing.
They don't know how much money they're going to need to take care of themselves through the rest of their lives.
Amazing, right? That's a big component of our program as well, is that Big Class Society.
Especially since the 70s. I think you guys have matured into that.
Yeah, when we had a really wonderful woman back in the 80s who did a lot of work on that program, and it's really been paying off for us, and has a lot to do with us being able to even start this building project, quite honestly.
Wow.
Yeah, and it is, and you're right. I always say you should be nice to every supporter. I don't care if they give you a penny, if they give you $1,000 check when they come in the door. Everyone who comes in, or if they can just give their time and not money, should be treated with respect. But you're right. It's unbelievable how many people with those bequests, when you look back and you say, oh my God, it seems like they didn't have so much to give because they gave $5 here and $10 there, maybe a couple times a year, and for a long time. And longevity is what I think is most important, because like you said, maybe they just wanted to be conservative because they didn't know what was going to happen. But then, they say they were frugal and it worked out. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's really amazing that people do that. I mean, to leave a legacy like that is just, we're so lucky. And I think in this country too, the culture of philanthropy is really, really amazing and remarkable. I felt like when I lived in Spain, although in general the people, when I work with the cats, and I work with some other nonprofits as well, people were charitable, but it didn't seem like it was as, I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't as expected. It's almost like, I feel like here it's more common to, who are your charities, or these are my charity, right? There it's kind of like, oh yeah, maybe I'll give here and there, but it wasn't as just a part of your life. It wasn't as big of a part of their culture, the philanthropy, like it is here. And maybe it has to do too with they have so many social programs that isn't felt like it's needed as much, right? Because schools pay for healthcare is free and things like that. Mm-hmm. I think that might have something to do with it. But we're on our own over here, so people, for the most part, so people feel like no one else is going to do it. So there's more personal responsibility among individuals to do that for the causes they believe in.
This has been so wonderful. I really appreciate your time. Is there any last thing that you would want to tell our listeners and viewers before we go?
I would say that it's amazing how many resources are out there now. And so I feel like a lot of times when people with their pet cats or whatever the animals, really anything, but especially the animal welfare field has grown and professionalized so much. Don't feel alone. So if you have a problem, a stray cat issue, a behavior issue with your own pet, anything, financial issue that is making it difficult for you to care for your pets, don't feel like you can't ask for help. And I also think that there's more of a culture of groups working together. So I think people really need to not be afraid to pick up the phone or get online and just reach out to ask, because even if it seems like, oh, well, this problem's really unique, I probably don't have a program for this. Even if there isn't a formal program, there's probably going to be someone at your local agency who can refer you to someone else that can get you the help you need. So many groups are recognizing the importance of keeping animals in their homes or doing what they need to do off-site. So no need to kind of just say, well, I got to throw in the towel and bring this cat to my local shelter. Call first, and I'm sure someone will be able to provide you with the services that you need so that you don't have to do that. So I think too often people aren't sure, and animals end up in places where they didn't really need to go. And so I would advise everyone to don't be afraid to reach out and ask for the help that you need, and someone will provide that to you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Yeah.